Hello my friends, Sean Ferrick here for Trek Culture, and today's video is brought to you by Star Trek Fleet Command. Hooray! More on that now in a second.
When Star Trek first hit the screens in 1966, there were a lot of ideas that were swirling around this brand new show and what Roddenberry's team of writers could come up with. Ideas and suggestions abounded, with entire fleshed out proposals dismissed and hastily rewritten. Plot threads and episode ideas were hashed out and rehashed out over and over again until a finished product could be brought to screen. While some stories and ideas would fall foul of creative differences, some would be discarded due to scheduling conflicts and production difficulties. This is true of almost every television show, but given just how vast the franchise of Star Trek has become over the decades since Captain Kirk first sat in the captain's chair, there's a lot that was left on the cutting room floor. With a fanbase as passionate as Trek's, it's no surprise that many of these details have been dug up and discussed at length. So with that in mind then, I'm Ellie with Trek Culture, and here are 10 abandoned Star Trek ideas that would have been incredible.
My friends, just before this video starts, I just want to take a quick second to shout out and thank our sponsor, Star Trek Fleet Command. Fleet Command is a free-to-play game available on both iOS and Android, and it's available via the link in the description to this video. You may be wondering why I'm dressed this way while talking about Fleet Command. I think you know where this is going. Star Trek Strange New Worlds is coming to Fleet Command. Yes, that is true. To coincide with the launch of the show on Paramount Plus, it is launching in-game. What does that mean? It means you get to use the souped-up Enterprise. It also means you get to use the holodeck, which is a little bit cool, but we have new characters coming. Those characters including Captain Pike, you've got Lieutenant Spock, and you've got Lieutenant La'an Noonien Singh, who I would follow into battle in a heartbeat. Of course, as you know, the game itself is open world, it's constantly evolving, so there's always new games, new things to do. In fact, there's more than 25 new missions on the way with Strange New Worlds as well. There's also a little bit of a surprise for those of you who feel he didn't get his due. While he's not Strange New Worlds exclusive, there is a rare Reginald Barclay that you can play as. Now, initially, he's only going to be available on PC before he extends into the mobile game as well, so make sure that you grab him while you can. Just to say again, thank you so much to Fleet Command. It is available via the description in the link to this video. Straight away, let's go.
Number 10. Maurice Hurley's plans for Q. After the tumultuous production of The Next Generation's first season, head writer Maurice Hurley was ready to pack in the whole bridge crew and start afresh. He had said in an interview with William Shatner that he had hoped to kill off the main cast and build the second season around finding a new crew for the Enterprise. Pretty drastic. Maurice Hurley eventually left the show at the end of the second season, and the 1988 writer's strike put paid to many of his plans. Many of the episodes that he had intended weren't produced, and those that did make the screen were often last-minute replacements to scrapped plans. Hurley's plans for Q would have been extensive. The idea was that early in the second season, Q would pay another visit to the Enterprise to torment Picard and warn him of the dangers that were out there. Because of this, Q would be stripped of his powers and have to live on the Enterprise for a time, until he was able to regain his abilities. If all of this sounds familiar, it's because this plot was condensed into 2 episodes, Q Who and Deja Q. The missing Q arc was essentially Q having to adjust to humanity and learn how to get along with Picard as an almost equal. Ronald D. Moore later commented that Hurley's plans were more plot-focused, and after his departure from the series, the show became much more character-focused. He stressed that they didn't want to overuse characters like Q, which this arc may well have done. Pivotally, however, there was one difference in Q Who that didn't make it into this arc. Q wouldn't have introduced humanity to the Borg. That would have been something else entirely. Number 9. Maurice Hurley's plans for the Borg. Q wasn't the only Season 2 plan that Maurice Hurley had to leave by the wayside. Initially, his plans were for the first season finale episode, The Neutral Zone, to be the first of 2 parts. The second part would focus on the Enterprise and the Romulans being forced to work together to unravel the mystery of the missing colonies in both their territories. The answer to that mystery? A migratory insectoid hive mind species called the Borg. That's right, in the eyes of the man who came up with them, the Borg weren't meant to be a race of cyborgs, they were meant to be space army ants. They were extracting all materials from planets in their way. The Enterprise would discover that they were heading deeper and deeper in the Federation and would have to scramble to collect allies in facing off against this threat. The Romulans and Klingons would be among them. This plan would have seen the complete defeat of the Borg at the conclusion of the second season. Just think on that for a moment. The Borg were only meant to appear for a single season, and they weren't introduced by Q. Perhaps it's for the best that the writers strike through these plans asunder, because afterwards Maurice Hurley left the show and it took a very different direction. A better one? Perhaps not, but a fascinating one, certainly. Number 8. Giant Ferengi. A script by Stephen DeKnight for Deep Space Nine was simply going to be called Giant and would have placed a humorous bent on Ferengi evolution. Worf, while accompanying Jadzia Dax for a drink in Quark's bar, would have found a Ferengi hitting on Jadzia and angrily dismissed him. He would have uttered the line, "There's no honour fighting a single Ferengi," only to hear, "I'd say the same thing about Klingons," from behind him. Worf would then be faced with a Ferengi who was at least his equal in height and body mass, and the two of them would engage in a traditional barroom brawl. Eventually, it would turn out that these two Ferengi, one little and one large, were brothers on the run from Ferengi space. Worf and Dax would have been tasked with escorting them back there, discovering that the two of them had discovered a scientific formula to activate the genes for physical strength and prowess that was deep within the Ferengi genome. They explained that Ferengi were once large and strong but had developed down an evolutionary path to be smaller, sneakier, and thus not considered a threat by larger species. When the four of them were attacked by Jem'Hadar on the way, they'd all have to work together to survive. Eventually, Worf would have to acknowledge the history of the Ferengi as warriors in their own right. Could have been fun. Number 7. Ronald D. Moore's obsession with musicals. Yes, before Buffy the Vampire Slayer hit us with its beloved musical episode, Ronald D. Moore wanted The Next Generation to have a musical episode. When the idea didn't go over particularly well there, he attempted to get it made on Deep Space Nine and was again shot down. Ron's ideas were never fully fleshed out. His desire sprang simply from thinking that making a musical episode for either show would be fun. He's quoted as saying, "There's some tech virus that infects the crew and they can only communicate in song, you know? And just do it and have a ball." Alas, nobody was interested in pursuing it and the idea went nowhere. Coincidentally, Linda Park pushed to have a musical episode on Enterprise as well, given that she was a trained singer, as were John Billingsley and Scott Bakula. This idea didn't go anywhere either. Given the enduring popularity of Buffy's Once More with Feeling, maybe it might have been wise to cash in on the musical vibe. Also, has anyone attempted to adapt that Buffy episode into a stage show yet? If not, why not? Number 6. The Literal Year of Hell. Scuttlebutt would have us believe that the plans for Voyager's Year of Hell were much more extensive than the two-part episode that we eventually received. While this two-parter was sufficiently brutal as we witnessed the degradation and crippling of our beloved Voyager over an extended period of time, it could have been more. The plans for the Year of Hell were for it to have spanned an entire season, with the Krenim temporal ship haunting them for more than 20 episodes. Voyager would have accumulated more and more damage as time went by, as there would be nowhere for the ship to repair itself and they would slowly lose crew members. The two-part episode did do an excellent job of conveying the damage that Voyager is continually subjected to, but picture that breakdown spread over a whole season. Picture the sense of loss and isolation that could have been worked into the very fabric of the show as it progressed, mirrored by the increased frustration of Anorax as he tries to shape an entire quadrant to his liking until it's unrecognisable. The ultimate conclusion of the season would still have been the same, with Janeway destroying both the crippled Voyager and the Krenim Time ship in a spectacular final space battle. Eventually, the plans for the season-long arc were reduced to the two-part episode we watched. Jerry Taylor and Brannon Braga felt that a season-long investment that would be reversed at its conclusion was too much for the audience to bear. Voyager, for all of the excellent solo episodes that are within it, overall lacked cohesion as a series, and this missed opportunity could have paved the way for more overarching stories, the kind that Voyager's very premise demanded. But it wasn't to be. Number 5. Who's Killing the Great Voyagers of the Delta Quadrant? And why, yes, that title is directly taken from Who is Killing the Great Chefs of Europe. The premise of this episode, put forward by Brian Fuller, was to follow the adventures of several alternate reality Voyagers. These different Voyagers are being systematically hunted down and destroyed by an unknown force that can somehow jump between these realities. Ideas included a completely Klingon version of Voyager, where the Klingon Empire had defeated the Federation back in Kirk's day, complete with Kate Mulgrew in full Klingon makeup, and a version that was completely crewed by holograms, as well as a few others. Eventually, our Voyager and her Captain Janeway would discover what's happening. They would be confronted by another Voyager, this one commanded by Chakotay, whose marquee crew had overwhelmed the Starfleet crew. This alternate Chakotay had become convinced that Janeway was responsible for them being stranded in the Delta Quadrant, and while he had found a way to jump timelines, he hadn't yet found a way to cross the vast distance to return home. While this episode never panned out, it would have given Chakotay a lot more to do and probably would have been pretty fun. We'd already seen Worf jump from timeline to timeline in the Next Generation episode Parallel, so why not a rampaging alternate Voyager? Number 4. The Tantalus Prison of James T. Kirk. You all remember the Tantalus device, yes? It was a minor plot point in the classic original series episode Mirror Mirror. When Captain Kirk, Dr. McCoy, Uhura, and Scotty are transported to the Mirror Universe by a freak ion storm, Kirk discovers a device in his opposite number's quarters. This is the Tantalus device, something that could simply make a selected target completely disappear. This device later cropped up in the palace of Emperor Giorgio when she used it to keep an eye on a wayward Michael Burnham. Frequent Star Trek novelists Judith and Garfield Reeves-Stevens had pitched a 2-part episode for Star Trek Enterprise that featured the Tantalus device, where it would have been revealed that it didn't kill people at all. It simply transported them back in time, about 150 years, to an isolated penal planet. Since Mirror Spock, resplendent in his goatee, had used the device on Mirror Kirk just after the end of Mirror Mirror, this means that Kirk could still be there in the 2150s, when Captain Jonathan Archer and his crew would find him. You see, in the original pitch for this episode, the Mirror Universe hadn't been created by the 2150s. It didn't exist yet. Mirror Kirk and Archer would have tried to figure out what happened to it, and somehow, in some grave experiment, they would have accidentally created it. Yes, the plans for the Mirror Universe episode In a Mirror Darkly originally included a role for the evil version of Captain Kirk. While the episodes we did receive were amongst the strongest of Enterprise's 4th season, just imagine having had Kirk in the mix as well. Number 3. The first season of Enterprise. So the first season of Enterprise could have turned out very different from the one that we watched. The pitch by Rick Berman and Brannon Braga was for a show that was set entirely on Earth, for the first season at least. Much of the premise still made it into pilot episode Broken Boat, but some of the plot points from the 4th season, such as anti-alien resentment amongst some humans, would have made it into this storyline. Essentially, the series would begin with first contact with the Klingons, which would have left Starfleet Command scrabbling to finish their first Warp 5 capable ship. So far, so familiar, but there was no temporal Cold War in this proposal, and humanity would have stumbled at the first hurdle. The brand new Enterprise would have been destroyed in its first attempt at a launch, leading the design team to go back to the drawing board. Eventually, this idea was rejected, and the show we got was a lot more like its predecessors in the original series, The Next Generation and Voyager. Eventually, Enterprise would shake up its format with the Xindi War, but the first 2 seasons were not what they could have been. Number 2. The Godhead. A scrapped episode from the 3rd season of the original series, the Godhead was meant to be the 26th episode. This would have put it to be the very last, beating out the somewhat troublesome Turnabout Intruder. In this episode, the crew of the Enterprise would have discovered an ancient alien race that had discovered a way to accumulate all of their vast knowledge and place it inside a single person. While the details of who this single person were to be weren't released, it was likely to have been one of the crew, but unlikely to have been either Kirk or Spock. Whoever they turned out to be, the Godhead themselves would have been driven mad with power and would have become determined to use the Enterprise to conquer the galaxy. This story was actually put into the first stages of production, but the final 2 episodes of the 3rd season were cancelled by NBC, and this one never saw the light of day. The Godhead is one of many original series episodes that could have been. In fact, our very own Brie has made a whole video talking about them, which includes some Oscar-worthy acting by Adam Cleary, so be sure to check that out. But for now, number 1. Star Trek: The Beginning. The tentative title for an 11th film that never came to pass, The Beginning was meant to be the first of a trilogy of films that bridged the gap between Star Trek Enterprise and Star Trek the original series. A full treatment was approved and multiple versions of the script were written, but the project fell apart in favour of going with J.J. Abrams' reboot film in 2009. Set 4 years after the events of Terra Prime, the United Earth Stellar Navy is being folded into Starfleet, and a few officers are resentful of the move. One called Tiberius Chase has family ties back to the Terra Prime movement, who wanted to drive all alien influence from Earth. Somewhat suddenly, a massive Romulan attack fleet emerges from behind Earth's moon. They demand for Earth to turn over all of the Vulcans living on the planet, to which Admiral Gardner refuses and manages to rally Starfleet and UESN forces. When the Romulans are just barely driven off, it's discovered that the Romulans are planning to regroup with reinforcements. Tiberius Chase and his band of survivors track down the nuclear stockpile of an isolationist group, then hijack the USS Spartan from its dry dock in Saturn and attempt to bring the war to the Romulans. This would be the opening moves of the much talked about Earth-Romulan War, during which the two sides did not see each other face to face. The war was fought entirely in ships, and the subsequent Neutral Zone Treaty was negotiated over subspace transmission. In one final detail, Tiberius Chase would be sending letters to Penelope Gardner, the daughter of Admiral Gardner, who was a schoolteacher in Iowa, where a certain captain was born. While the 2009 reboot of the franchise seemed like a better bet, the franchise lost a lot by not following through with this project. But given how much of Star Trek there is, we, its faithful fans, must always remember that there were so many more ideas out there. Many would have sucked, but so many would have been just awesome. In theory, out there in an alternate timeline, they all got made for our viewing pleasure. Just think on that one. And that concludes our list. If you can think of any other examples, then do let us know in the comments below. And while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe and tap that notification bell. Also, head over to Twitter and follow us there, and I can be found across various social medias just by searching Ellie Littlechild. I've been Ellie with Trek Culture. I hope you have a wonderful day, and remember to boldly go where no one has gone before.